Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're going to begin a study today of the Gospel of Matthew. And we're going to take 3 sessions to introduce the Gospel of Matthew. We studied the Gospel of Mark not long ago, and I don't think we can spend enough time in the Gospels. We're told in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, that God spoke to humans in a variety of ways. He spoke to the patriarchs, he spoke through the law, but now he speaks through his Son. Jesus is God's communication to us. We're very blessed to have 4 Gospels that tell us the story of Jesus. So we get to spend time with him. We get to know him as a child. We get to see him born. We get to see him be baptized. We get to see the beginning of his ministry. We get to listen to his teachings. We get to see him when he's tired, when he's overwhelmed, when he is transformed with something of his heavenly glory. We get to see him snatched in the garden and crucified on the cross, and then to raise again on the 3rd day and to ascend to heaven. We get to see all of it. We get to see all of it from 4 different camera lenses, from 4 different viewpoints. Why do we need 4 Gospels? Because we do. God gave us 4 Gospels, and we need all 4 of them. And of course, in the 1st century, which is when all 4 Gospels were written, each one has its own role to play. Each one has its own audience that it targets. Mark, which we studied most recently, and which is probably the first gospel to be written, although some people would make the case that Matthew is the first gospel to be written, and can make a compelling case. I don't know that there's a lot at stake in figuring that out, so I don't want us to spend time on it. But Mark's gospel, as we studied it not too long ago, is the shortest, and in it the episodes are the shortest. There's the least amount of red ink, and there's the most visual, audio, tactile detail in Mark's gospel. And when we talked about Mark's gospel, we said it seems to be, the script or the transcript of the spoken word. And it seems to be a gospel that is prepared for sharing, to be preached directly. If you were telling people who didn't know anything about Jesus the story of Jesus, and it had a great appeal to Roman and Greek audiences because it's told in the style of the great epics, the Aeneid, the Iliad, the Odyssey. It really is a salvation epic with Jesus as the central person who achieves that salvation. And then with Luke, we have the well-researched biography, which is what he says in the first 2 verses of his gospel. Speaking to Theophilus, I went out, I talked to eyewitnesses, I pieced together accounts, I've researched this biography, and it is a polished, very modern, very well-researched biography of Jesus that reads like a history that David McCulloch or Doris Kearns Goodwin would write. It's very much in that style of biographical literature. With John, who writes at the end of the 1st century after the other 3 Gospels are delivered, he gives us details we didn't have before, names that were not named before, and really meditates on the person of Jesus as the last living apostle and perhaps even the last living Christian from that 1st century, perhaps the last living eyewitness of Jesus Christ. But with Matthew, we get a gospel that clearly ties Jesus to the Old Testament, to God's eternal plan going all the way back to the patriarchs, and quite intentionally so. The first 3 Gospels are often called the Synoptic Gospels, the 3 Gospels that see things the same, that take the same approach, a straightforward biography, whereas John is much more a philosophical meditation. But Matthew is unique among the four gospel writers in that he clearly seems to be writing to Jewish Christians, people who have a very deep knowledge of the Old Testament and of Judaism, and for whom it is important to know that Jesus checks off all the boxes for the Messiah as they are communicated in the Old Testament. In Matthew's Gospel, there are never any translations of Hebrew or Aramaic terms. In Matthew's Gospel, there are never any explanations of Jewish customs. In Matthew's Gospel, there is a heightened sense of importance in finding for almost every event in Jesus' life the Old Testament prophecy that it fulfills. And the book begins, the gospel begins with this genealogy that is not at any way like Luke's genealogy. Luke's genealogy goes backwards from Jesus all the way to Adam and establishes this line so that we know the facts as historians. He has done his genealogical research. But in Matthew's gospel, we start with Abraham. And we will be looking at the genealogy in detail in a few days. And we go from Abraham to David, from David to Zerubbabel to Jesus, establishing Jesus' line directly to David as inheriting the throne and directly to Abraham as inheriting the covenant. And so this is very clearly a gospel that has been directed at an audience of Jews or of God-fearers, Gentile converts to Judaism or God-fearers, those who were attaching themselves, like Cornelius did in the book of Acts, to Judaism without actually converting to Judaism. Folks who have a prior faith in the Old Testament documents, in the law and the prophets. And we have in Matthew's gospel the fully Jewish Jesus who is connected to the Old Testament. We have the gospel really that was preached on the day of Pentecost. In Acts chapter 2, in Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost, his sermon is this: you guys know Jesus, you saw him, you know that he's fulfilled prophecy, you know that he's performed miracles, and he is the Messiah that God has always promised. This Jesus whom you crucified, God has made both Lord and Christ. The real preliminary document to that sermon is not Luke's gospel so much as it is Matthew's gospel. Matthew's gospel is the document that takes Peter's sermon and on the day of Pentecost, and of course Matthew was preaching on that day too as one of the 11 that stood up. He's there preaching too on the day of Pentecost, and that sermon they delivered that day, that really provides the structure of the Gospel of Matthew. We'll talk more about Matthew's Gospel next time as we take 2 more sessions to introduce it. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes. I'm Barry Bryson, and we'll see you next time.